Racist woman expels black girl from park, but is shocked to discover her true identity of her father. On a sunny afternoon in Seattle, a black girl is expelled from a park by a woman who believes the space should be reserved only for people like her. Sandra Coleman, a 45-year-old white woman, successful and respected in her community, has no idea that her impulsive act will trigger a series of events that challenge her beliefs and change her life forever. The story unfolds in an upscale neighborhood where exclusivity and social status define interactions among residents. Sandra, known for her participation in social events and her impeccable image, finds herself in a moral dilemma when she decides to confront Alyssa, an 8-year-old black girl playing alone in the playground. The girl, full of life and curiosity, was under the care of a babysitter who had stepped away for a brief moment. It was at this instant that Sandra, overwhelmed by her prejudices, approached the child and aggressively expelled her from the park, claiming it was not her place. Sandra's act did not go unnoticed. The next day, the story spread rapidly among residents, reaching Marcus Thompson, Alyssa's father. Marcus, a successful black businessman known for his fight for inclusion and social justice, could not let the situation go unanswered. He went to the park to confront Sandra, and the tension between them grew with each passing moment. Upon discovering that Marcus is an influential man, Sandra panics, realizing that her actions could jeopardize her social standing and reputation. As the fallout from the incident grows, Marcus initiates a campaign for inclusion and tolerance, challenging Sandra to confront her own prejudices. The neighborhood, which was once a safe space for her, begins to turn into a hostile environment, and community meetings become stages for heated discussions about racism and discrimination. Sandra, now pressured by the community and her own insecurities, finds herself on a path of reflection and transformation. As she deals with the consequences of her actions, Sandra realizes that her beliefs have been shaped by traumas and past experiences. She is forced to reevaluate her ambitions and what truly matters in her life. The story leads her to a turning point where she must choose between remaining trapped in her prejudices or seeking a path of reconciliation and change. The encounter with Marcus and Alyssa becomes a decisive moment where Sandra realizes that true wealth is not in social status, but in the capacity for empathy and the pursuit of a fairer world. Through this journey, the narrative explores themes of personal overcoming and unusual friendship, challenging not only Sandra, but also the readers to reflect on their own beliefs and attitudes towards others. The story is an invitation to empathy and transformation, showing that often the greatest lessons come from the most unexpected encounters. After the incident in the park, Sandra Coleman felt the weight of guilt and shame on her shoulders. The arrogance that once defined her had turned into a burden she did not know how to carry. Looking in the mirror, she no longer saw the strong and respected woman everyone admired, but someone who had hurt an innocent child and, consequently, the community around her. The image of the scared and confused black girl haunted her thoughts, provoking a restlessness she could not ignore. Meanwhile, Marcus Thompson, Alyssa's father, was determined to turn pain into action. He was a man who had always fought against inequality, but what happened to his daughter struck him particularly deeply. The idea that a child, simply playing, could be the target of such cruel prejudice motivated him to act. Marcus began planning a community meeting, intending to discuss racism and discrimination, seeking to unite residents around such an urgent topic. Sandra, for her part, felt cornered. Upon receiving the invitation to the meeting, she hesitated to accept. The idea of exposing herself even more to the community terrified her. The voices that once applauded her could now turn against her. However, a part of her knew she needed to face the consequences of her actions. Doubt consumed her, but the need for redemption began to outweigh her fear. On the day of the meeting, the atmosphere was tense. Residents gathered at the community center, and the room was full. Among them were Sandra's friends, but also many who saw her as a betrayer of the trust the community had placed in her. When Marcus took the stage, Sandra felt her heart race. He began to speak about the importance of inclusion and empathy, and the room murmured in agreement. The way he spoke with passion and sincerity touched everyone, but Sandra could not ignore the feeling that all eyes were on her. With every word Marcus spoke, Sandra felt smaller. The weight of her actions oppressed her, and her stomach churned as she realized that while he spoke in the name of justice, she represented injustice. When Marcus invited her to speak, the silence in the room became deafening. She hesitated, the words stuck in her throat. A part of her wanted to hide, but another, stronger part wanted to free herself from that weight. Finally, with a trembling voice, Sandra stood up. Looking at the crowd, she saw familiar faces but also many unknowns all paying attention. She began to speak, her voice initially low but gradually firming up. Sandra admitted her mistake, expressed her regret for hurting Alyssa, and reaffirmed her intention to change. What should have been a moment of reconciliation, however, quickly turned into an emotional battlefield. Some residents expressed their opposition to her, raising voices of indignation. Others supported her, asking for a second chance. The division in the room was palpable, and Sandra felt lost amid that storm of opinions. The anger and pain of many were visible, and she realized that the hurt she had caused would not be easily forgotten. Marcus, seeing the growing tension, intervened, asking for calm and encouraging a constructive conversation. As the meeting progressed, Sandra found herself surrounded by people who, like her, had their own stories and challenges. Among them was Lucia, a Latina woman who had faced discrimination for years, and Andre, a gay man who had struggled with family rejection. Each of them shared their experiences, and Sandra began to understand that her actions were not just about her, but about a cycle of pain and prejudice that affected everyone. By the end of the meeting, Sandra didn't know if she had achieved anything positive. She felt exhausted, emotionally drained. However, a small seed of hope was sprouting inside her. The meeting had forced her to confront her fears and prejudices, and although the path ahead was still uncertain, she felt she was starting to walk a new path. Sandra's journey was just beginning, but now, more than ever, she was determined to seek change, both in herself and in the community she had once felt so distant from. After the meeting, Sandra still felt shaken. The voices of reproach and support echoed in her mind, creating a whirlwind of emotions. Determined not to back down, she began to attend more community meetings. However, with each gathering, the shadow of her mistake followed her, making every interaction an emotional challenge. Conversations about inclusion and empathy constantly reminded her of the pain she had caused Alyssa. Over time, Sandra began to realize that the community was divided. Some still saw her as a monster, while others sought to understand that she was trying to change. This division left her uneasy. She wanted to make a difference, but felt her actions were not enough. With each step she took, the pressure increased. Her circle of friends supported her, but there was a visible tension in their interactions. They wanted her to forgive herself, but also hoped she would understand the gravity of what she had done. One day, while attending a workshop on diversity, Sandra heard a story that deeply moved her. It was Lucia's story, who shared her experiences of discrimination and how it had affected her throughout her life. Lucia's account made Sandra feel a tightness in her chest, as if the woman's pain was a reflection of the pain she had caused herself. Understanding Lucia's experiences only intensified her desire to make amends. After the workshop, Sandra approached Lucia. She wanted to learn to understand more about the struggles those voices, which had once been just echoes in her mind, represented. However, Lucia was cautious. She didn't want to open up to someone who, in her view, represented everything that was wrong. This resistance made Sandra feel even more isolated. The desire to connect with the community was constantly frustrated by her own history. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his fight. He organized a series of activities in the community to promote inclusion. When Sandra offered to help, she saw the hesitation in his eyes. He knew she was trying to change, but the pain of his daughter was still fresh. The rejection he felt at the thought of working alongside Sandra was a hard blow for her. It made her question whether she could really be accepted back. The feeling of failure settled in like a weight on her heart. Weeks passed, and Sandra began to feel demotivated. Her efforts seemed futile. She decided she needed some time for herself to reflect on her journey. During this period, she began to write in a journal. Putting her thoughts on paper helped clear her mind, but also brought to light the intensity of the guilt that consumed her. With each word written, Sandra remembered Alyssa's haunted look, and the pain seemed to multiply. One night, while reviewing her notes, Sandra had an epiphany. She realized that change would not come solely from her personal struggle, but also from the willingness to open up to others. With this new perspective, she decided it was time to act differently. Instead of focusing only on her own redemption, she began to think about how she could help others feel heard and valued. Before we continue with this moving story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories. And let us know in the comments which city you are watching this video from. Sandra organized an event at the community center where people could share their stories. The idea was to create a safe space for everyone to express themselves. When she presented the proposal to Marcus, he was surprised but also intrigued. At first he hesitated, still caught up in the pain he felt. But upon hearing the sincerity in Sandra's words, he decided to support her. On the day of the event, the room was full. Sandra felt her heart race as she looked at the people there, each carrying their own stories and wounds. When she began to speak, her voice trembled but was filled with determination. She didn't just want to ask for forgiveness, she wanted to listen and learn. The audience's response was mixed, but there was an air of curiosity. Some people were willing to listen, while others remained skeptical. As the stories began to flow, Sandra realized that pain was a shared experience. She saw tears, smiles, and even nervous laughter. The event turned into a space for healing. However, as the stories unfolded, Sandra also faced the reality that not everyone was ready to forgive her. The fear of being rejected again followed her, but she knew she had to keep trying. When a man stood up and began to speak about the negative impact discrimination had on his life, Sandra felt a tightness in her heart. He was clearly hurt and angry. However, he was also willing to talk, and that made her realize that dialogue was the first step toward reconciliation. The room fell silent, absorbing every word. At the end, the man looked her in the eyes and said, "You may have hurt a child, but maybe there is hope for you and for all of us." His words echoed in her mind. Sandra realized that even amid the pain, there was room for hope and transformation. With this new understanding, she felt stronger. The road would be long and full of challenges, but she was willing to face each one of them. With every story shared, every tear and every laugh, Sandra was finally beginning to understand the power of empathy and human connection. As the event progressed, the atmosphere was charged with emotion and expectation. Sandra, nervous, watched the reactions of the people around her. For her, that moment was more than an attempt at redemption. It was an opportunity to rebuild her life and her connection with the community. However, as the stories unfolded, an unexpected revelation emerged, changing everything. At the back of the room, a woman stood up. It was Clara, a former co-worker of Sandra, whom she hadn't seen in years. Clara's gaze was intense, and the tension in the air increased. She began to speak, her voice trembling but firm. Clara shared how discrimination had affected her job opportunities and how that impacted her personal life. What started as a narrative of pain quickly transformed into a direct criticism of Sandra, who listened in silence, her heart heavy. "I remember how you always talked about the importance of being inclusive, but when you had the chance to act, you failed," Clara said, her words cutting like a knife. "You not only hurt Alyssa, but you also hurt all of us who believed that change was possible." The impact of Clara's words was immediate. Sandra felt as if the ground was pulling away from under her feet. The pain she thought had dissipated over time now resurfaced in an overwhelming wave. It was as if every disapproval she had faced in the previous weeks was condensed into that moment. What had been a quest for redemption now felt like a free fall into darkness. Clara's disappointed look, now a reflection of all her insecurities, made Sandra reconsider her choices. She remembered all the times she tried to convince herself that she was changing, that her actions were enough. But in reality, they were just attempts to escape the weight of her guilt. Clara was right. She had failed to act according to her beliefs. And now, by hearing someone else's pain, Sandra realized she couldn't just ask for forgiveness and expect everything to be resolved. It required more. The room was silent, and all eyes turned to Sandra, waiting for a response. What would she say? The pressure made her feel small, but at the same time there was a spark of determination beginning to shine within her. Instead of defending herself, she decided to be honest. "You are absolutely right, Clara," Sandra began, her voice trembling. I failed. I failed Alyssa and all of you. I was so focused on trying to redeem myself that I didn't realize how superficial that was. I didn't do the necessary work to understand the pain I caused, and that hurts me more than I can express." The words flowed from her mouth like a torrent. Sandra was putting her defenses aside and allowing vulnerability to guide her. What started as a moment of shame became a space for true reflection. She admitted her failures, not only to herself, but to everyone present. Sandra was no longer just trying to apologize. She was acknowledging the depth of the wounds she had caused. As she continued, the atmosphere in the room began to change. People seemed more receptive, as if Sandra's honesty was breaking down barriers. She spoke about the pain and shame she felt, but also about her desire to learn and grow. The event that had been a platform for difficult dialogue was now transforming into a space of empathy and mutual understanding. And it was at that moment that Sandra realized that true overcoming did not come solely from the pursuit of forgiveness, but from the willingness to listen to and understand others' pain. She was breaking free from her own cycle of guilt and beginning to see the community in a new light. Each shared story was an opportunity for connection and healing, not just for those speaking, but also for herself. With this new perspective, Sandra felt stronger. She understood that change required vulnerability and courage, and she was willing to face the consequences of her actions so that she could help others feel seen and heard. The road ahead would be challenging, but now she was ready to face it with an open heart and a mind willing to learn. When the event ended, Sandra felt she had taken an important step, not only toward her own redemption, but also toward building a stronger, united community. And more importantly, she had found a new purpose, not only to repair what was broken, but also to help create a space where everyone could share their pain and hopes. After the event, Sandra left the room with a mix of relief and anxiety. The feeling of having exposed herself, of having put her flaws on display, still lingered. She knew that, although that moment had been transformative, the challenges ahead would be considerable. The first thing she did was look for a quiet place to reflect. She found a bench in a small nearby park and sat down, allowing her mind to process everything that had happened. As she watched the leaves of the trees gently swaying in the wind, Sandra realized that the journey to redemption would not be easy. The honesty she had shared that day had opened doors, but had also exposed the fragility of her position. The first immediate consequence was the reaction of the people. While many had supported her, others expressed their skepticism. Some voices in the community still echoed the pain she had caused, and Sandra knew she would need to work hard to regain their trust. In the following days, she decided to dedicate herself to better understand the experiences of others. She began attending community meetings and getting involved in groups that discussed issues of inclusion and discrimination. Each meeting was a new opportunity to learn and listen. However, the challenge was immense. Sandra encountered stories that deeply moved her, but also reminded her of her own guilt. Sometimes she left the meetings with tears in her eyes, feeling the weight of the stories she heard. It was a constant internal struggle between the desire to help and the pain that her past actions caused. One day, during one of these meetings, she met Raphael, a young man who had faced discrimination at his workplace. He spoke with palpable sadness, and his words hit Sandra like a punch to the stomach. She couldn't help but remember Alyssa, and how her inaction had contributed to the suffering of people like Raphael. After the meeting, she decided to approach him. "Hi, Raphael," she said, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to say that I truly feel sorry for what you went through. I know I can't change the past, but I'm here if you want to talk." Raphael looked at her with distrust, but the vulnerability in his gaze began to dissolve. "It's hard to trust someone who's already made mistakes, you know," he replied, frustration evident. "Words are easy, but what about actions?" Sandra nodded, understanding the pain of that statement. "I understand. I failed by not acting when I had the chance, but I want to change that, not just for myself, but for all of us." The conversation with Raphael made her realize that, although she was trying to do the right thing, there was still a long way to go. That interaction not only challenged her, but also motivated her to keep seeking ways to redeem herself. She began organizing workshops on inclusion and empathy, inviting people from diverse backgrounds to share their stories. However, even with all the effort, insecurity still accompanied her. Often she wondered if she was doing enough or if her actions were just a way to redeem herself. The emotional pressure began to mount, and in a moment of weakness, Sandra found herself crying alone in her apartment. Loneliness enveloped her like a heavy cloak. She remembered Clara and her words. The echo of criticism still resonated in her mind, and doubt consumed her. What if I can't change anything? What if people never forgive me? The uncertainty made her feel small and powerless. That night, Sandra decided she needed support. She called a longtime friend, Anna, and asked to meet. As they sat together in a cafe, Sandra poured out her insecurities. Anna listened attentively, and after a while she said, "Sandra, you can't carry the weight of the world alone. What you're doing is important, but you don't have to be perfect. What matters is the intention and the willingness to learn." Those words were like a balm for Sandra's soul. Hearing Anna's support, she realized she was not alone on this journey. The change she sought did not depend solely on her but on a collective effort. Leaving the cafe, Sandra felt a renewed spirit. The journey to redemption would be long and full of obstacles, but now she knew she had allies, and that every step taken toward empathy and understanding was a step in the right direction. Over time, she began to see changes in the community. Conversations about inclusion became more frequent, and people started to open up about their experiences. And although challenges still existed, Sandra felt she was contributing to something bigger than herself. The light of hope began to shine again, and each interaction, each story shared, brought her closer to a future where everyone could feel seen and heard. Sandra, increasingly involved in her transformation journey, began to understand that true overcoming was not just about correcting past mistakes, but also about accepting the vulnerability that accompanied her. The days became a cycle of learning and self-discovery. She dedicated hours to studying inclusion and empathy, but she also allowed herself moments of reflection where she confronted her insecurities. In one of the community meetings, Sandra decided to share her own story. Nervous but determined, she spoke about her failures and the impact she had caused. The silence that followed was heavy, but as she looked into the faces of her listeners, she realized that many were absorbing her words. In that moment, she felt the connection she had been seeking, a connection that transcended fear and doubt. However, not everything was easy. On a particularly difficult day, a member of the audience questioned Sandra's intentions. "Do you really care? Or are you just trying to redeem yourself?" That question hit her like an arrow. The insecurities she thought she had overcome resurfaced, and she almost gave up on continuing her work. But instead of letting herself be defeated, Sandra decided to confront that doubt head-on. She realized that criticism, though painful, could be a catalyst for her growth. After the meeting, she withdrew to a quiet corner and made a promise to herself not to give up. From that day on, she committed to not only hearing the criticism, but using it as a form of learning. Sandra began inviting critics and supporters for one-on-one conversations, seeking to understand their perspectives. This approach helped her realize that while some people still did not trust her, others were willing to give her a chance. This small step motivated her to keep going. Little by little, she started to build a space where people with different experiences could come together and talk. It was in one of those meetings that she met Laura, an older woman who had experienced many injustices throughout her life. Laura, with her wisdom and patience, became an inspiring figure for Sandra. The two began to develop an unexpected friendship. Laura shared her stories and taught Sandra about the importance of resistance and resilience. Over time, Sandra realized that her friendship with Laura not only helped her grow, but also made her stronger in her mission to help others. The gatherings became a safe space for everyone to share their experiences. Stories of pain, struggle, and overcoming began to intertwine, creating a support network. By listening to the experiences of others, Sandra learned to see the world from new perspectives. She understood that success was not just about achieving a personal goal, but about collectively contributing to the well-being of everyone. The richness of their lives was in the connections they formed, the stories they shared, and the empathy they cultivated. Over time, the community began to transform. Dialogues about inclusion and acceptance became the daily norm for many. Sandra felt a change within herself. The insecurity that once paralyzed her was now accompanied by a growing confidence. She realized that even when she failed, there was always a lesson to be learned. Every mistake became an opportunity for growth, not just for her, but for everyone around her. In a moment of reflection, as she walked through the park where it all began, Sandra looked at the trees swaying in the wind and smiled. The journey of redemption was not linear, but it was filled with lessons and, above all, hope. She had learned that true strength lay in her vulnerability and in the willingness to open herself up to change. Life was not perfect, but every step she took was a step towards a more inclusive and empathetic future. Now, when she looked back, Sandra saw not just mistakes and regrets, but a path of overcoming. She had found her place in the community, not as a savior, but as a learner willing to listen, understand, and act. With each new friendship she formed, each story she shared, she felt more part of a whole, and that filled her with gratitude. The transformation she sought was not just within herself, but in the lives of everyone around her. And so Sandra's journey continued, filled with challenges, but now illuminated by the light of hope and empathy. One sunny afternoon, Sandra prepared for the most important meeting of her life. She had organized an event in the community, bringing together people who had been affected by her past actions and those seeking a space for dialogue and reconciliation. It was the moment to face her insecurities once and for all and to seek true acceptance. However, as the hour approached, anxiety took over. Vivid memories of her mistakes and critical voices echoed in her mind. The fear of being rejected again nearly paralyzed her. She recalled the cutting question that had struck her. Do you really care, or are you just trying to redeem yourself? That doubt still resonated, and the pressure to prove her worth felt overwhelming. When she finally arrived at the venue, she saw the auditorium packed. People were there, some with expressions of curiosity, others with distrust. Laura, her friend and mentor, was in the front row, offering an encouraging smile. Sandra took a deep breath and took her place on stage. The spotlight seemed to pull her away from the world, but at the same time, it illuminated her heart. She began to speak, her voice trembling at first, but gradually her confidence grew. She shared her journey, the mistakes, the lessons, the friendships she had cultivated. She spoke about the importance of empathy and listening to others' stories. However, she knew she needed to address the issue of distrust directly. She said sincerely that she was not there to redeem herself, but to learn from them and build a path together. A heavy silence settled in the auditorium. Sandra felt the weight of that expectation. Then a man in the back raised his hand. He asked why they should trust her, and what guaranteed that she wouldn't hurt them again. The question echoed like thunder. All eyes turned to her, and the pressure mounted. Sandra felt her heart race. Fear and doubt tried to overwhelm her, but she remembered Laura and the conversations they had. Her friend's wisdom echoed in her mind. Vulnerability is strength. Being honest about your failures is the first step towards transformation. With that in mind, she looked into the man's eyes and answered sincerely that she could not guarantee she wouldn't make mistakes again, but she promised she would be there to listen and learn from each of them. She was willing to take responsibility for her actions and work to repair what she had caused. Sandra's words seemed to resonate in the hearts of many. She saw some hardened expressions begin to soften. It was as if the barrier that existed between her and the community was starting to dissolve. She continued, speaking about the importance of facing challenges together, of building a safe space where everyone could share their experiences. Change does not happen on its own. We need each other to grow. As her words spread throughout the auditorium, more voices began to emerge. People started to share their own stories of pain and overcoming, creating an atmosphere of empathy and understanding. The energy in the room shifted, and Sandra felt the tension ease. A man who had previously shown skepticism now stood up and said, "I don't fully trust you, but I'm willing to listen. Let's move forward together." That statement was like a light at the end of the tunnel. Sandra smiled, feeling a wave of relief and gratitude. That was the spirit she had been seeking. People were willing to give a chance, to open up to dialogue. The resistance she had faced transformed into a drive to move forward. At the end of the meeting, as people dispersed, some approached Sandra. They expressed their gratitude for her courage in sharing and for being willing to build a supportive space. Laura hugged her, and Sandra felt warmth in her heart. The friendship that had formed with Laura was not just a connection, it was a source of strength that would help her continue her journey. As she walked home, Sandra reflected on what she had learned. She had faced her greatest fear, and in doing so, discovered that vulnerability could be a bridge, not a barrier. True overcoming did not come merely from correcting mistakes, but from acknowledging pain, listening to others, and building a future together. Sandra smiled, knowing that the journey was just beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, but now she had courage and community by her side, and more importantly, she had learned to trust herself, to see her flaws as opportunities for growth. The transformation was underway, and she was ready for every step that would come next. After the meeting, Sandra felt a mix of relief and euphoria. The weight she had carried for so long seemed to have lifted. The words of support and looks of understanding followed her as she left the auditorium. Each step toward her home was a reminder that she was not alone on this journey. The community had begun to open up to her, and that encouraged her to open up even more. In the following days, Sandra dedicated herself to strengthening this new bond. She organized informal gatherings where everyone could come together to talk. The first was in the park, a welcoming space where children played and adults exchanged smiles. She invited everyone who had been at the meeting, and many attended. The atmosphere was light, and conversations flowed naturally. Sandra realized that, by sharing their experiences, people began to connect in ways they had never imagined. One afternoon, while talking with a group, a woman approached. She was one of the most critical people during the meeting. "Sandra," the woman said, "I still have my doubts, but I'm trying to understand. Can you tell me more about how you deal with your mistakes?" The question, though challenging, was a sign that the woman was willing to listen. Sandra smiled and replied, "It's a process. I've learned that acknowledging my mistakes is the first step. Then I try to understand how I can do better. And most importantly, I seek to listen to others, because we all have something to learn." The conversation continued, and others joined in, sharing their own struggles and stories of overcoming. It was as if a current of empathy was forming. Sandra felt that she was building something new, a support network that could help heal old wounds. Over time, Sandra noticed that the community was changing. People began to come together on collaborative projects, caring for the neighborhood and organizing events that promoted inclusion. The sense of belonging grew, and the conversations that had once been laden with distrust were now more open and sincere. Laura, her friend and mentor, was always by her side. One time, while they were walking together, Laura commented, "You surprised yourself with your own strength, didn't you? The vulnerability you showed inspired everyone around you." Sandra agreed, reflecting on how her courage was transforming not just her life, but the lives of many others. "I now realize that true strength comes from the heart," Sandra replied. "When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we create space for others to do the same. That's how we grow together." However, not everything was easy. There were days when insecurity haunted her again. One day, upon receiving a message from someone who still criticized her, Sandra felt discouraged. She shared her concerns with Laura, who listened attentively. "Remember, Sandra," Laura said calmly, "every step counts and not everyone will be ready to forgive or understand. The important thing is that you continue your journey with authenticity." Those words were a balm for Sandra's heart. She realized that she couldn't please everyone, but she could be true to herself. Over time, Sandra became a central figure in the community. People began to seek her out for advice and support. She dedicated herself to listening to each story, to understanding each pain. What once seemed like a burden became a mission. Through dialogue, she saw how wounds could be healed and relationships restored. On a quiet night, while stargazing with Laura, Sandra reflected on the transformation she had experienced. "I still have a lot to learn," she said, "but now I know I am not alone. Every person who joined us is a part of this journey." Laura smiled, and the two shared a moment of silence, understanding that the road ahead would be long, but together they could face any challenge. Sandra's life had changed. She was no longer the woman trapped in the past. Instead, she had become a catalyst for change, someone who embraced vulnerability as a strength. With each meeting, each conversation, she was helping to build a future where empathy and understanding reigned. And above all, there was a new hope, not just for her, but for the entire community. Sandra's journey was just beginning, but now she faced it with courage and an open heart. Over the months, Sandra's life transformed in surprising ways. What had started as a burden, filled with insecurities and fears, became a path of self-discovery and connection. She reflected on her accomplishments and realized that true strength lay in her vulnerability. Every time she opened up, she allowed others to do the same. The community, once divided and distrustful, now flourished in an environment of support and understanding. Although there were moments of discouragement, Sandra learned to deal with criticism. With Laura's encouragement, her friend and mentor, she understood that she couldn't be the savior for everyone, but she could be a pillar of strength and hope. Sandra's journey was not just about her. It was a reflection of how empathy and dialogue could change lives. And so, with each meeting, each conversation, she felt stronger and more confident. However, a shadow was approaching. An old rivalry with a woman who had criticized her in the past began to resurface. Sandra knew she needed to face this situation head-on. Instead of seeking revenge, she decided to invite this woman to a meeting. With courage, she sat down with her in a cafe and sincerely shared her experiences. To her surprise, the woman, who had once represented an obstacle in her life, began to open up as well. The two discovered that they both fought against internal demons, and that empathy could overcome hostility. Over time, the rivalry transformed into an unexpected friendship. Sandra realized that instead of seeking revenge, she had found a path to reconciliation. This act of kindness and understanding not only healed their relationship, but also strengthened the community that was forming around them. Together, they began to work on projects that benefited everyone, promoting inclusion and solidarity. Sandra reflected on the lessons she had learned. True wealth was not in defeating others or seeking revenge, but in cultivating relationships and contributing to the collective well-being. The realization that success was not measured by personal achievements, but by the ability to positively impact the lives of others, filled her with deep satisfaction. As she looked to the future, Sandra knew the journey would not end there. She was just beginning to explore the potential of her new life. The community, now united, had a renewed purpose, and she was at the center of it, guiding others to find their own voices. The friendship that formed between her and her former rival was a testament that understanding and dialogue could heal deep wounds. Sandra felt grateful for all the experiences that shaped her. She learned that true wisdom comes from the ability to listen, to connect with others, and to be true to oneself. With an open heart, she was ready to face new challenges, knowing she was not alone on this journey. Sandra's story is an invitation to all of us. May we reflect on our own experiences and seek meaningful connections. The journey of transformation and overcoming begins when we decide to be vulnerable and open ourselves to others. Don't wait any longer. Share your stories and reflections in the comments. Together we can build an even stronger and united community. And if you like this story, like and subscribe to the channel so we can bring more inspiring content like this. The time to act is now.